Today, our nation's schools are quite different than they were just a generation ago, and all too often display a hostility toward cherished Christian and American values. There are many Christian teachers who still try to hold the line, but feel their hands are tied by state-mandated textbooks, liberal teachers' unions, adversarial court rulings, and anti-Christian civil liberties groups. Christian teachers who stand against such opposition are to be commended and encouraged. The intent of this video is to call attention to the conflict of two opposing worldviews. It includes dramatized scenes from an all-too-typical high school classroom. The script for the teacher's dialogue comes directly from the published guidelines for teachers and student textbooks used nationally. While many teachers do otherwise, it will shock you to see what teachers are taught to teach your children.
In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. By the word of the Lord were the heavens made, and all the host of them by the breath of his mouth. He spake, and it was done. He commanded, and it stood fast. The heaven, even the heavens, are the Lord's, but the earth hath he given to the children of men. The vastness of the universe is truly astounding, but even more incredible is the fact that here in the middle of that vastness is this pale blue dot, the earth, set in orbit just the right distance from the sun. Greater still is the fact that God, for purposes known only to himself, chose to create life here on this planet. That gives real meaning to life and to how we view this world. But there is another worldview. It is naturalistic. It is a view that says life on this planet involuntarily and arbitrarily evolved by random chance process. This planet is not at the center of anything. At best, it exists in the backwaters of an unbounded universe. There is no God, no designer, and no purpose in nature. This worldview, though sometimes subtle in its expression, is evolutionary in its philosophy and aggressive in its propagation. It is a worldview that is at war with God and his people.
In the last several years, education has become an arena for political and legal debate as to who has control and what do they teach. The intensity of that discussion is not merely derived from a passion for better education, as some would have us believe, but rather from the conflict of two opposing worldviews, creation and evolution. It is, in fact, a battle, a war for the minds of the uninformed and the defenseless. Nowhere is this conflict manifested more aggressively than in our institutions of education, both public and private. What you're about to see is a dramatization of a church youth group meeting and a biology class. In the church youth group meeting, you will hear Dr. John Morris, a university professor and currently professor of geology at the Institute for Creation Research, as he deals with the doubts and questions of some of the students from that biology class. The biology teacher's dialogue is taken from student textbooks and teacher's editions. What he has to say may shock you, but this is a scenario that is played out every day in classrooms all across America. So for the next 20 minutes, let's take a walk across that battlefield.
So in review, the stars, planets, galaxies, the universe was formed in the resulting effects of the Big Bang, which according to best estimates was about 15 billion years ago.
What about the idea that our universe was created?
Hold these, please. And whatever you do, don't drop the earth. This is the wrong class to be asking that question. Save it for your comparative religions class in college. Remember, students, that religion and science don't mix. Science deals with observable facts, whereas religion deals with traditions, myths, and belief systems. Okay, don't forget, Big Bang quiz tomorrow.
Well, hello. It sure is good to be with you today and to learn of your interest in this overall creation versus evolution issue. I got a question for you as we start out. How many of you have heard that evolution has been proven by science? Mm-hmm. How many of you have heard that, that you came from the animals? Mm-hmm. How many of you have heard that science has disproved the Bible? Now, I know that many of you have been taught these other ways of thinking, and so you might have some questions. What I'd like to do today is to answer as many of those questions as I can and show you that science and the Bible are perfectly compatible and that the Bible is something you can base your life on and your eternal destiny. So, who's first? Who's got a question?
Dr. Morris?
Yes.
My biology teacher says that creationism is religion and that religion doesn't mix with science. He says that evolutionism has proven the Bible wrong many times.
Actually, his comment is pretty standard these days, and it stems from, believe it or not, from a bogus definition of science. Now, when I went to school, I was taught that science was the search for truth. But now science has been redefined as naturalism, that only natural events are allowable. Only those are, natural events are the only ones that are real. So then by definition, any hint of a supernatural involvement in things is by definition excluded. Well, obviously, naturalism is a religion, but unfortunately, the school policies have implemented this, as have the courts and the textbooks, with devastating results, poor science and poor teaching to the students. Well, now, as to this idea of the Bible being proven wrong, I'm a geologist, but I do try to keep up with the various fields of science, and I can assure you that there has never been a scientific fact or a scientific discovery that disproves or contradicts any portion of Scripture.
But my biology teacher says that a Big Bang theory, which happened 15 billion years ago, created the world. But I heard a scientist on the radio say that the Big Bang theory got God going and created our universe. And then I asked my parents about what my biology teacher says and about creation, and I don't know what to believe.
Good question. I'm glad you brought that up. You might be surprised to know that the Big Bang idea is really just a philosophy more than a science. Think for a moment, what did you learn about the scientific method? You know, the scientific method has to do with observations. You gather your data, you collect your facts, you run your experiments, you make your measurements. Those observations, that's science. That happens in the present. But the Big Bang, if it happened at all, it happened in the unobserved past, and therefore it's not really in the same category as observational science. The Big Bang, it's primarily just a mathematical model of history. It's certainly not an observation, and thus it's not empirical science. I predict it'll be totally dead in a few years. Meantime, don't be intimidated by it.
How did life get here? Was it carried on some meteor or asteroid? Or perhaps life was planted here by some advanced extraterrestrial. It's hard to be sure, since no one was around to observe how this occurred. But we do know what the surface of the Earth was like and the probable conditions under which it occurred. In 1953, a scientist named Stanley Miller conducted some experiments based on this knowledge of early Earth. And his experiments showed that the building blocks for life can be produced in such an environment. Other experiments by a scientist named Sidney Fox showed how a single cell could form and reproduce quite easily. So, for all you religionists, let me put this in terms that you can understand. It all started with a single-celled organism that we now call life in a primordial soup that we call the ocean, on an insignificant planet that we now call home, in an unbounded space we call the universe. So for those of you who think that you are something special, you may want to rethink your position. Here are your midterm exams that you took last week. Some of you did very well. Some quite poorly. A couple of you were not paying attention. I believe I made it perfectly clear. Those of you who insist on bringing up the idea of creation will fail this class.
Just when I start feeling good about myself, and then I hear in biology class that my ancestors were like hatched in some kind of primordial soup or something. And then to learn that I'm some kind of insignificant person because we all got here by some incredible gambling odds. my parents say I'm special, but am I really? I mean, am I special to God?
Very good observation. You've picked up on a major implication of evolutionary thinking. You see, evolution is more than just an idea about where we came from. It's an idea about who we are. Now, as to the origin of life issue, those experiments have really only produced trivial results. Stanley Miller's famous experiment used conditions which were wholly impossible on Earth, and they still produced only simple amino acids, not life. Remember, even the simple amino acids, they're not life. To say he created life, that's wrong. It's like equating a simple brick with a skyscraper. But the origin of life is easily the biggest weakness in evolution theory. Now, there are some other big weaknesses. The fossil record doesn't help evolution either. We see no clue in the fossil record that any basic category of life has ever changed into another category. If a starfish or a clam evolved into a fish, there should be a lot of in-between forms. But even though we have millions and millions of fossils, the missing links, they're still missing. Now, this has led some evolutionists to propose that evolution, which goes too slow to see in the present, it went too fast in the past, and it left no fossils. That's bad science. But they'd rather believe anything other than creation.
Ontogeny recapitulates phylogeny. This theory was proposed by Ernst Haeckel in 1866. What this means is that developing embryos repeat the evolutionary process of their ancestors in some way. Now, this pattern suggests that differences among species evolved in many steps from a common ancestor. A good example is your appendix. Now, in some mammals, this organ is larger, and it serves the purpose of aiding digestion. However, in humans, it serves no discernible purpose. This is what we call a vestigial organ, and it is evidence of our biological connection with other mammals.
In biology class, we're studying like how we're related to animals, something like vest for organs.
It's vestigial.
Okay, anyway, our biology teacher's saying that those things prove that we're related to animals. I mean, do we like have any leftover animal bits or something?
Good question, and it brings up a real faux pas in evolutionary thinking. You know, in the early 1900s, scientists had listed about 100 organs or muscles in the human body that they thought were not needed. They thought they were leftovers from animal stages and proof that we came from the animals. But this argument, it turns out, was really an argument from ignorance. Just because we don't know an organ's function doesn't mean that it has no function. Well, nowadays, medical science has identified uses for each one. The list has gone to zero. The appendix, we now know, does play a role in the body's immune system, as do the tonsils, and all the others have some role. Now, we can live without them, just like we can live without a hand, but clearly we're better off to keep them. This is another example where bad thinking has resulted in bad science and still results in bad education. Well, why is this argument still used? It's because they have no better evidence, even though it's wrong, and because it works so well in teaching evolution. Now, keep in mind, two worldviews are at war, two belief systems. Now, many leaders in education, the textbook writers, and the university professors, they consider themselves to be evangelists for this naturalistic, humanistic religion. And they'll use any trick at their disposal to win converts. Well, many teachers don't realize they're in a battle, and so they just simply teach what they were taught, these wrong arguments that still appear in the textbooks, and thus they perpetuate the problem. But let me encourage you young people to do whatever extra study is necessary to stand strong in the face of this onslaught.
Physical similarities are not the only thing that we share with animals. Behavior is another area in which we see evidence of evolution. A behavior observed in a certain variety of apes shows that when a new male wins the position of leader, that he then begins to beat on the females of the group until they abort the offspring of the ousted leader. Induced abortion is perhaps the oldest birth control method known. Also, there are many species, ranging from bedbugs to whales, that engage in homosexual activities or behavior. It is not only observed in our animal ancestors, but genetic research shows that it is still in our genes and it is an inherited trait. Another area where religious traditions get really excited is reproduction. Such buzzwords as abstinence, fidelity, and marriage are emotionally charged. But in biology, emotion plays no part in the evolutionary process. Reproduction, and lots of it to perpetuate the species, is the biological mandate in the ancient struggle for survival.
My pastor says the Bible teaches that homosexuality is a sin. My mom says it's disgusting and unnatural. I think it's gross. But my biology teacher says it's inherited in our genes, which proves we came from animals. Which is it, right, wrong, or genetic?
Glad you brought it up. I was on a call-in radio debate recently with a university biology professor, and when homosexual behavior came up, he became very aggressive in its defense, and he was using evolution. He was saying that homosexuality is a beneficial mutation. It's nature's way of controlling the population growth. It's a way to satisfy your sexual desires without overpopulating the planet. He said that, well, animals of the same sex do certain things to one another. We're animals. Why shouldn't we? But students, make no mistake. The Bible identifies homosexual behavior as the repugnant sin of sodomy. All too often, evolutionary thinking is used to justify sin. Well, this professor on the radio went on to claim that the size of a part of the human brain was different in homosexual men who had died with AIDS than in straight men who had died. Thus, he claimed that homosexuality was genetically determined. Now, this research made big news recently, front-page headlines, and it's still used by those who lobby for homosexual behavior as a legitimate alternative to marriage. But, you know, you seldom hear that other researchers have failed to find the same results. Question is, were his results valid? We don't know, but we do know that the researcher who made the claim was himself a practicing homosexual and who soon left the university to join a homosexual community. Well, here's the creation answer. God made man in his own image, the Bible tells us. Male and female created he them, Genesis 1:27. Male and female, that's your choices, nothing in between. But even if a person's genetic makeup or environmental pressures produce tendencies in this area, it's still sin, and one must choose not to yield to temptation. You see, God ordained the one man, one woman marriage for life concept, and he designed us and he set this up as the proper lifestyle. Premarital chastity and marital fidelity, that's the creation solution.
My parents have always taught me about abstinence and that abortion is wrong, but because of that, some of my friends think I'm from the Stone Age or something. And then my biology teacher, he says that the desires to reproduce and to abort are both natural urges and that evolution uses them in the struggle to survive. I mean, how can that be?
Excellent question. Shows you're doing some good thinking. You know, I can't tell you how many scientific articles I've seen in the literature that promote these kinds of concepts on scientific grounds. The reasoning goes like this. A scientist may have studied a group of animals, a gorillas, or maybe a pride of lions, something like that. They notice these animals doing a certain behavior pattern, but they say that we're animals, we should do the same thing. Example being, few animals mate for life, why should we? Thus, evolution is used to justify promiscuity and maybe even brutality. You see, evolution talks about might makes right, the survival of the fittest, and it's been used to promote those kinds of concepts. Well, these ideas, people get involved in them for all sorts of reasons, but whenever a serious scientific justification for them is made, evolution always pops up. Maybe you've heard the idea that in the mother's womb, the human embryo remembers its evolutionary stages. It goes through an evolutionary history or something like that. They say that at one point, the human embryo has these certain lines in its neck, and evolutionists say that these are like gill slits in a fish. Well, nothing could be further from the truth. We now know that these aren't gill slits at all. The slits that do exist, they turn into features of the inner ear and some of the glands in the neck area. They don't turn into gills at all, nothing to do with breathing. The whole idea of remembering your evolutionary history, it's been disproved now for about 40 years, but it's still in the textbooks. And worse yet, it's even used day by day in abortion clinics around the country, where counselors will, in talking to a young pregnant girl, will ask the question, how far along are you, honey? Well, you know, about 3 months. And the answer will be, it's okay. It's in its fish stage. It's okay to kill a fish. And it's okay to kill a fish. But it's not okay to destroy the image of God. You see how wrong thinking always begets wrong behavior. And evolution is wrong thinking.
Now let's talk about something that most people have a fear of: death. Attempts to cope with this concept called death has given birth to countless religions. But as you know, we will not discuss this in class. We will, however, talk about death from a biological perspective. The key to the evolutionary process is the propagation, not just of the species, but of the genes. So in a sense, we are just vehicles that are used by our genes in order to reproduce themselves. And death is a tool or mechanism used by evolution to remove the vehicles that are less likely to adapt to an environment so that the offspring that are able do not have to compete with the parents. This fact may not warm your little hearts or stir your emotions, but it is how biology works. Cold, hard, observable facts of science.
Dr. Morris, I asked my dad why we have to die, and he said it's one of the two things that everybody has to do: die and pay taxes. My biology teacher says that death is something nature thought up to help our genes. Why is there death?
Another good question. In fact, this issue is perhaps the most important one we'll ever face. And it's an issue that creationists and evolutionists most seriously disagree over. Well, now, to answer your question from a scientific standpoint, we die because of a law of nature. All things, living and non-living, they wear out, they grow old, they deteriorate, and they eventually die. Everything is in a downward cycle of decay toward less complex levels, and this is a basic law of science. But evolution says that over time things get more and more complex. Hydrogen atoms become stars and galaxies and planets and people. A single-celled organism becomes a fish and finally a person. Thus, the basic trend of proposed evolution violates scientific law. The death principle is more fully explained in the Bible. In the beginning, the creation was very good. There was no pain, no suffering, no cancer, no death. But Adam and Eve chose to rebel against the Creator's authority and set their own rules. But rebellion, of course, is sin. And the Creator's stated penalty for sin was death, the wages of sin. This we read in Romans 8:22. The whole creation now groans and travails in pain together until now, because of the presence of sin and its penalty, death. Now all things are dying. To an evolutionist, death is of the utmost importance that they cannot give it up. But you know, the same is true for the Christian worldview. By establishing the penalty of sin to be death, you see, God made it possible for Jesus Christ, God the Son, to come back into creation and to die to pay sin's penalty. The wages of sin is death. Christ died for our sins. You see, as Christians, we can't give this up and still be Christian. But think about it. If evolution is true, then death was here long before sin. Thus, death is not the penalty for sin, since it was here before sin. And if death is not the penalty for sin, then what good did the death of Jesus Christ accomplish? Friends, the battle goes deep. It's not just a scientific issue. It's a battle for the mind. The question is, who is going to control your mind?
My parents say that all the arguing over creation and evolution is just a hype to confuse people. They say it really isn't important. So who cares? What difference does it make to me?
What difference does it make? All the difference in the world and the worldview. As you heard Dr. Morris say, wrong thinking produces wrong behavior, and evolution is that wrong thinking. Remember that the biology teacher's dialogue was taken directly from textbooks and teacher guidelines, complete with scientific inaccuracies and antagonism towards Christian students. Is it any wonder then that there are so many heartbroken parents who don't understand why their teenage son or daughter has adopted ungodly behavior and attitudes? And the countless numbers of fine Christian parents who see their young person through college in pursuit of a better education, only to find that they have embraced ideologies and philosophies that are opposed to Scripture, and that they have abandoned the faith as a result of doubts cast in their minds because they didn't have answers to questions their professors raised. Those are the casualties in this battle for the mind and soul, but one need only be informed to be armed. The Institute for Creation Research exists to help equip people with answers to hard questions. Through a newsletter, books, videos, and seminars, ICR is committed to spreading the truth of creation and combating the lies of evolution. And I challenge you to avail yourself of the truth and to arm your family and your church. In our society today, there are countless issues over which these two worldviews collide. Indeed, the war of the worldviews rages on and must no longer be ignored.